Hi, everybody. Welcome again to another episode of the ShopNotes Podcast. It's episode number 73 today. I'm your host, Phil Huber, joined by John Doyle and Logan Whitmer. On today's episode, we're going to talk about the current issue of Woodsmith Magazine, planning and designing projects, and a whole host of other topics. So I hope you enjoy today's show.
This episode of the ShopNotes Podcast is brought to you by Woodsmith Magazine. Woodsmith Magazine has been the trusted source for all your woodworking information for over 40 years. From tips and techniques to furniture projects to shop projects, you'll find it all at Woodsmith Magazine. Subscribe today at woodsmith.com.
Now, at the risk of this turning into another long discussion on Logan and his sawmill, not that that's a bad thing.
It's always a risk.
You were out sawing yesterday.
Yeah, it was.
And one of the things that you had mentioned, I think the day before when you told us that you were going to be out, is that you've been sawing a bunch of white oak recently and how it's kind of turning into a favorite. And I was wondering if you'd elaborate on that. Like, what do you mean? What makes it a favorite for you now?
So when I had messaged you guys saying it was one of my favorites, I had been in Cedar Rapids this last weekend, finishing up some sawing I had there, and because I had basically an empty truck, I ended up bringing home some of the Directo wood that I milled last summer. Two of the trees at one of my grandpa's house was one was a Norway maple, one was a white oak, and I have this summer already milled some white oak. Last summer I milled that white oak, and then just yesterday I milled a bunch of white oak. And I don't know what it is. There's something about quarter sawn white oak that is just good looking to me. And maybe it's just because it is a really traditional American furniture wood. You know, you got a lot of different types of furniture or styles of furniture that are made out of white oak. It's just the classic to me. Now it doesn't. I know it doesn't work in everybody's house. It's not everybody's style. But I just like, you crack open a white oak log, and you get down to those center three cuts out of like the pith, and then the cut above and below it. And it's just pure, true quarter sawn white oak. It's like, makes me weak at the knees. And it cuts very nicely for being a hardwood. You know, I know a lot of people when I'm out milling for them, a lot of people think, it's the harder the wood, the harder it is to saw. And while that can be the case, the hardness of the wood doesn't really affect a sharp bandsaw blade. It more affects the durability of the blade because of the heat that is generated.
Sure.
But it cuts nice. It depends on where the tree grew. It can be relatively knot free, which is really nice when you get just really clean white oak. A lot of stuff I cut yesterday was a timber stand that was getting cleared for a development, unfortunately. And because of that, they grew in a forest, so they were straight, they were long. I could really choose my log length, so I had almost everything cut at 10 foot. And when we got into the logs, I mean, there was hardly any knots in them. You always get around the pith is considered the defect zone, because that is when the tree was young and it was growing limbs and stuff, and those get shaded out and they get buried in the next cambium layer, and then they get wrapped up into the tree. So you always have some in the pith, but yeah, I just enjoy it. I really like it, and not to sound too hoity-toity or anything, but it's nice to saw something different than walnut.
Sure.
So yeah. And quite honestly, I enjoy the quarter sawing. Like, you can quarter saw on a bandsaw. It's kind of a ghetto quarter sawing. It's a different way to do it, and it's not a true quarter saw, but you can yield about I'm going to say 50 to 60% quarter sawn lumber out of a log on a bandsaw mill. I enjoy that process. So yeah, it was fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because most of your other sawing is, I don't know, what do they call it? Plain sawing or through and through or whatever.
Yeah, and I've been doing a lot more, and I think I've told you guys this, and I probably said it on the podcast, so you guys can write in and tell us how I keep talking about the same things and never shut up about it. When I started sawing, I was sawing live sawings, they call it, where you leave the bark on the edges. So you basically ended up with, air quote, slabs of wood with live edge. And that works nicely to stack one log. But now that I'm, a year down this journey, I'm getting a lot of lumber. And it's a whole lot easier for me to build a 4-foot wide by 6, 7, 8 foot tall stack of walnut than it is to stack 12 walnut logs. So I've been mainly turning stuff into cants and then just plain sawing it. So the plain sawing yields about 30, 30, 30. So it yields about 30% flat sawn or plain sawn, 30% rift sawn, and 30% quarter sawn. So it's just a good mixture.
Right.
So little different. When it's something like white oak, you can increase the dollar value of that lumber by quarter sawing it. But you're also losing some weight. So I guess there's probably a balancing point there where it doesn't really matter. But
right.
Yeah, I really enjoy the process. Quarter sawing oak's a blast. I love it. I like seeing, and it's fun because you get those medullary rays, and some trees are just absolutely full of them, and some trees you quarter saw and like, is this really quarter sawing? Because I don't see any. So yeah.
So I have a question going back to talking about Cedar Rapids and the Directo trees. You spend a lot of time there milling lumber. Have you seen one tree species more affected by the storm than being knocked down than others, or is it just all the trees?
That's a weird question, because when I went to help clean up a friend of mine's timber that we deer hunt, almost every tree that got knocked down or topped there was a shagbark hickory. Like the white oaks kind of, they got branches broken, so they kind of got topped, but every tree that fell completely was a hickory, and I don't know why that was. Around Cedar Rapids, it was a real mixture. I guess I probably noticed the ash more than anything, because there are so many more ash. I think the city of Cedar Rapids 35, 40 years ago went haywire and just planted a ton of ash trees. So I see that more than anything. But I think equal percentage of tree species were affected, to be honest with you. So yeah,
interesting.
But just it's a weird, I know we've talked about the Directo before. It's a weird landscape to go back there, because what I grew up looking at around my grandpa's house, you don't realize how much the trees become part of the neighborhood. So it's standing in his driveway. I'm like, if I wasn't standing in his driveway, I would have a really hard time recognizing his street. So it's just very odd, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see, in 100 years from now, what the tree situation would be like. Because I see a lot less ashes probably being planted than what has been in the past, just because of the emerald ash borer. I think that's kind of gone out of style, what people will plant and grow in its place.
On the Cedar Rapids note, our buddy Matt Cremona was down here jacking a huge cherry tree from Cedar Rapids. Why don't you stay in your own state, Matt? Don't be coming. Yeah,
shots fired.
I don't know if you guys saw that, but he was down here with Black Horse Customs, I think, or Black Horse Woodwork, picking up a huge cherry tree, like a 40-some inch cherry tree, and I have never seen one of those. I've never seen a cherry tree that big in Iowa, so it's kind of interesting. They flatbedded it back up to Minneapolis, so yeah,
crazy. I wonder also if, I mean, certainly around Iowa, there's a lot of forested areas that took a derecho hit. But I wonder if in town, especially like in Cedar Rapids, if being city trees kind of levels the playing field, for trees to make them all equally vulnerable, or if there were specific species that fared better than others.
Because
that would be a question for a forester.
Yeah.
So if we have any forestry folk out there listening, we would love to hear from you on that.
Yeah, because you would think the strength and flexibility of the wood would come into play, but also the shape of the canopy, that how it catches wind. Would also
which
affect
I guess
that.
what would be, again, another question for forestry folk, what would be more vulnerable? A forest tree that is kind of like a palm tree shaped, where they're tall, skinny, and then they have a canopy up top to reach the sunlight, or would a city tree be more vulnerable because they spread out and they're basically a bigger kite, I guess. I don't know. That's kind of an interesting question.
Yeah.
So, but
because I remember, and I have to look up the book now. It was a guy he's a forester in Europe and was talking about, it's like Secret Life of Trees or something related to that, where he talked about how trees in a forest are interdependent, and then compared that to city trees, where it's can be somewhat forest-like depending on the age of the neighborhood and the kind of tree cover that's around there, but then also how city trees are usually more stressed as a tree just because of dealing with concentrated pollution, not having the same kind of, having more soil covered because of pavement and sidewalks and houses and that kind of thing. And you get like the heat island effect and all that kind of stuff. So I was wondering if that, if those stresses placed on a tree makes them more equal when it comes to a damaging event. I know around here a few times they've had, we've had highway projects where you have forest that kind of encroached on the highway, and then as they did the work, they kind of peeled off the outer layer of trees, and then we get like a big rain event, and then that next layer of trees was vulnerable, so you see a bunch of those topple down in ice storms or a wind event or something like that.
I don't know. It's funny because the Europeans have some interesting like forestry practices, I guess, where there's a couple of species that are actually cultivated and plantations in Europe. Boxwood's the one that pops to my mind.
Right.
There's a gentleman in England by the name of Hugh Crompton, and I've talked to him a few times, and he manages these boxwood plantations. And I might have told you guys about this, but he manages these boxwood plantations. You think boxwood, it's like a little hedge, right? Like that's the decorative hedges that people plant around their estates in England, I guess. I don't know. But the trees grow extremely slowly. Like they take 300 years to reach maturity, like where you can harvest them, and they still only get 6 or 8 inches in diameter. They don't get big at all. But this guy Hugh, he manages these plantations that were planted in like 1752, and he then goes through and selects trees to harvest. Like it's just what an odd thing, what an odd foresight for somebody to have 300 years ago. Say, hey, you know what? 300 years from now, these dumb woodworkers are going to want boxwood, so let's plant these plantations. And it kind of goes into what you're saying, Phil, because they grow so slow. You're basically planting a boxwood forest. I mean, they're very interdependent on each other, and they grow based on the surrounding tree structure. So it's just, I don't know, it's fascinating to me.
Yeah, it is fascinating. I remember reading that book, and then there was a book that came out a few years ago, the Oak, The Frame of Civilization, about the uses of oak throughout history. And, not only the uses of the material, but just oak forests in general and how that affected culture and the people that lived around them and how they used trees. So that was those, that kind of historic part of woodworking is very interesting to me and curious to know more about it, because it's, I can identify quite a few wood species when they're in the deli case, so to speak, at a store. But when I'm out in a forest, other than a few by leaves, I can't tell by looking at bark or trunks or things like that other people can, and that is something that I've been trying to learn.
And I've definitely picked up a lot of that with the sawmilling and working with some arborists. And it's funny because in Iowa, and correct me if I'm wrong, if anybody's listening, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm sure you will. In Iowa, I don't believe you have to have any arborist certifications. So it's very interesting because a certain arborist I'll work with will call one tree something, and then another one will call it something else. So it's kind of weird. I mean,
Sure.
John went to school for this, right? Did you have a minor in forestry or something?
Yeah. Forest products. So like what Phil said,
Okay.
I can identify wood in the deli case when it's cut up, but I didn't take any dendrology classes where I was identifying trees, so that's all amateur.
Yeah. See, now my brother
stuff.
went to school for like a natural resources degree, and several of his classes, he had a final exam where it's like they got dropped off in a forest, and it was
Scavenger hunt.
real early spring. Yeah, it was like real early spring or late fall or something like that, and it's go around and it's like point at the trunk of a tree, so there's no leaves really to go by, or all the leaves on the forest floor are all kind of mixed together, and it's like, what's that? What's that? What's that? And so he's pretty good at that, to the point where if I don't know what I'm doing, I just take a picture and text it to him. I'm like, what am I looking at?
Yeah, in those classes you had to learn all the Latin names,
Yeah.
species, and all that stuff, and I
I had to
want
do
learn
that
all
with bacteria when I was in pre-med. That was miserable. And you had to spell it right, too. Mm-hmm. And you guys know that. I'm a terrible speller. As an editor, it's a terrible trait to have. Mm-hmm. But, it's interesting because in Iowa, not to beat the subject to death, but like you said, Phil, it's hard to kind of, like, I know the common species and the species I'm looking for. So, the oaks, the red oaks, white oaks, walnuts, ashes, those are pretty easy. There's some weird ones that I wouldn't necessarily know just by the bark. I know by the leaf, like Catalpa. I guess locust has a pretty distinctive bark. But looking at like the Iowa State Forestry records and research, Iowa's forests are predominantly the most common tree in Iowa's forests are hornbeam, which I don't know if I could tell you what a hornbeam tree looks like. If it's the predominant tree in a forest, like I had to have seen it, right? But I couldn't tell you what it was. So it's weird because you're always finding new and weird stuff from a lumber and milling standpoint, I guess. So, yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it is.
Which I guess is to me is the fun part of knowing somebody who is a sawyer, because then it's, even if it is material that you normally find in a home center or lumber yard, there is a difference in either the figure or the appearance of it, grain pattern, as opposed to stuff that's, selected for uniformity.
Is interesting because I was telling you earlier, Phil, before we started this, one of the oaks I cut up yesterday, the stand, it was like a 2-acre stand of oaks, predominantly like northern white oak. But there was a few that I was like, that's an oak. I would have called them a pin oak just because I'm an idiot. But my one arborist was like, no, that's a he called it a jack oak is what he called it. And I'm like, I've never heard of that, but hold on, let me pull up the wood database, and they call it a blackjack oak. And I was telling you, Phil, when I cut it, it was the nicest, one of the nicest. It was definitely a red oak. Had a pointy leaf, definitely a red oak species, but it was one of the nicest looking red oaks I've ever cut. So I'm gonna have to dig through the pile and stack it and pull those aside and send you guys a picture. But you're right, when big production sawmills grab a tree, or when they buy lumber by the semi load, right? They are trying to get certain species, like northern red oak is one of the most common red oak species. Something like this blackjack oak probably wouldn't get mixed in with it, but it might, or it might go to some secondary market where it's not a lumber yard basically, right, that's getting it. But that's like you said, that's the fun part. It's like, this is really cool to know that this is a different species and be able to mess around with it. Like, 'cause you can't just go buy it. So it's fun to mess around with it and know with, a fair amount of certainty what it is. So it is just super cool. You guys got me all geeked out this morning already. Jeez.
Now, speaking of oak, John Doyle, you designed a project just recently that is going to show off the qualities of quarter sawn white oak. Would you want to talk about that a little bit?
Are we talking about the dresser?
The dresser, yes.
Well, it's a dresser that has drawers and it's made out of quarter sawn.
You are
oak.
Exactly. That was the kind of
John.
That's the backstory that I was looking
Doyle.
for. That's exactly.
Holds clothes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought of being a color commentator for a sports broadcast?
Does that really paint the picture for you? Yeah. It's based off, like, I think, what did it start with?
It was the gentleman's
dresser from Woodsmith 218, which was, I don't know how long ago would that have been.
Let's
We're
look.
in the 50s now, so that would have been 7 years ago.
That was Woodsmith 218, you said?
Yeah.
So that was 2014.
2014. So 7 years.
Yeah.
I was right. So it kind of, Ted designed that project, the gentleman's dresser.
Yeah.
And I just thought I really liked that project. We ended up building it season 12 of the Woodsmith shop. And around that time, I thought it would be a good idea to kind of build out a bedroom suite based off of that project. So I think the next project was a bed, kind of Craftsman style bed that went with that. And about 5 issues ago, last year sometime, added a nightstand kind of in that same style. This past month, I designed a dresser that also matches that, and just today I finished up a mirror that would also go with that, kind of rounding out this bedroom suite that we started so long ago. It's kind of like how I build projects. This is how I would build a bedroom set for my wife. It would start with a bed or just one piece,
right?
And then 5 years later, you'd get another piece of furniture, and then a year later maybe another piece. So it's like a decade-long process of building on a bedroom set. So
sure,
it's kind of fitting, I guess. So, but
I guess what I liked about it is, the original piece was designed by Ted, but it was based off of a Stickley design. So it was a historic Craftsman piece that Ted, I think he stuck pretty close to the script on it. Maybe a few details here and there are changed up on it, but
yeah. No, I really like designing and building furniture in that kind of Craftsman Stickley style, because most of it was quarter sawn white oak, but it's very the structure of it's just very simple, straight lines. There might be a few curves or arches in there, but it kind of just shows off that the grain of that wood, and like it would look totally different if you built it out of plain sawn red oak. Like it would be a totally different look.
Right.
And I think that's what I was
something
getting
else.
at.
It's just very distinctive.
Recent love affair of white oak is how much the quarter sawn white oak aesthetic comes into play in a design, because it does really make that style of furniture.
Mm-hmm.
So what are when you're, like, because you did the bed and the nightstand, now a dresser, and you have a mirror, I think, that you just sent some drawings around on. What are you, because it's not like you just make the gentleman's dresser smaller and now call it a dresser, blanket chest or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, what are you looking at when you're trying to design within that family?
A lot of it was just kind of like the same scale of parts, but in the gentleman's dresser, he had a kind of like a 4 square, like window type panel in the doors for that. So that was those squares are something that I pulled out for the headboard in the bed, and then also at the top of the mirror. Then just like I said, a lot of the just scale and parts, and some of the joinery. There was faux. It was pretty beefy tenons, more than tenon joinery, but then there was some faux through tenons that kind of added some, texture to the top and the sides. So they're just not. Like I said, that type of furniture is just very straight line. Not a lot of decoration. So that just kind of added a little bit more texture and feel to the project. So that was something that I kind of pulled out throughout the other projects. So.
And remind me if I'm wrong on this, John. Almost everything in that Gentleman's series has been like 1-inch thick stock, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which I think is very interesting. So we're all used to using 3/4 inch stock, and I like the proportions with that all being 1-inch thick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it just adds a little bit more beef to it, because like you said, most of the stuff like that's paneled or is 3/4 inch stock, and just adding that extra 1/4 inch really adds a lot of beef and heft to the projects.
Especially if you're trying to move one of those gentleman's dressers from your workshop into your son's bedroom.
Yeah, just because then it's all solid wood panels too. And just a lot of, especially with the gentleman's dresser, there was a lot of internal construction as well.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and it's funny because those in particular, those are the style. That's the style of furniture that I've had in mind as I've been milling this white oak lately. So I've been milling a lot of it at about 1 1/8 inches.
Okay.
Because I want to have that room to be able to leave it maybe 7/8 or 1 inch thick, because I like that proportion on that Craftsman or Stickley style furniture.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So.
No, I can definitely see that. Although I would kind of love to see somebody make that set in walnut, because I think that would have a really cool look to it. Mm-hmm. I don't know if, maybe at that point you kind of scale down the thickness on some of the parts just because of the walnut being darker, but I think walnut or cherry would look, really change the flavor of it, but would still have a fun presence to it.
Yeah. See, and to me and this is just complete perception in my mind, would that instantly flip that from like a Stickley style piece to lean more towards shaker?
Maybe, depending on how clean you went with it. You could also, because if you did that and you dropped the faux tenons on it, you could
Mm-hmm.
start to peel it a little towards mid-century or...
True.
Yeah. I hate to, because I feel like contemporary or modern style is too generic of a phrase, but
sure,
just kind of like a clean lined, almost Scandinavian look to it, just by leaving out a few details. So anyway, I just thought it was kind of fun to see how that project progressed, from being we've done that in the past as Woodsmith quite a bit, where it's, whether it's Shaker or Craftsman or some traditional styles that we've made almost as a reproduction, or heavily influenced by, but now to be able to take it and make something else out of it altogether, I think there's a lot to be said for being able to do that skillfully. And I just kind of a shout out to John for being able to do that, because I thought the bed turned really cool, and the nightstand was a cool piece, and even this dresser I think has a fun look to it. Any of them would stand well on their own, but put together would be an amazing bedroom set. So,
John, let me ask you this: Is it a vertical dresser, or is it more like a horizontal, like low chest of drawers type?
It's more of a horizontal, low chest of drawers.
Cool. That's kind of what's open.
It's like 4 feet wide. It's got 2 smaller or narrower 5-inch drawers on the top, and then 2 larger drawers on the bottom.
So do you guess that has the tall dresser kind of gone out of style? Or because I don't feel like I see them as much anymore. Yeah. Maybe that's just my tastes have changed, and where I look at furniture reflects that.
Yeah.
But I feel like I don't see, and maybe it's now that I'm I'm going to put air quotes around adult. So maybe it's because I'm an adult now, and I'm not short, not as short as I used to be.
Yeah.
I always felt like dressers were like tall, 5 foot tall, 8 drawers in them. And anytime I ever see one, it was made in the early 90s. And I don't feel like I see them anymore. I feel like I see a lot more low modern. I don't want to say modern. Phil told me I can't use the word modern, but you know what I mean? Like a lot of lower chest of drawer style type things.
Yeah, I think just here in the U.S., bedrooms have gotten bigger and bigger over the years, so it's not a necessity to have a taller dresser. I still live in my starter house, so our bedroom isn't as big. So we have a couple of taller dressers just because we don't have the
storage,
the square footage to spread out a little bit more. So it's a little more efficient for us to have taller dressers. But I think just having a shorter dresser is nice because it's easier to put stuff on it then. Because if you have tall dressers, then it's like
way up
higher.
Yeah.
So I mean, I still put stuff on it.
But it's stuff that you don't want Sarah to have.
Yeah, put it up high so she can't reach.
She doesn't. I'm sorry, Sarah, if you listen to this.
Yeah. No, she knows she's short.
So
it's not a surprise.
So just doing a quick Google search of the term dresser yields about 70 or 80% of them being a shorter horizontal style versus the tall vertical style.
Yeah.
Which is about what I would expect. And that's kind of a combination of that's places you could buy them like Crate and Barrel or Pottery Barn or whatever. So just kind of an interesting shift that I hadn't really thought about until we started talking about the gentleman's. Well, we don't call it a gentleman's dresser. What do we call that? A gentleman's sideboard.
Gentle persons.
Gentle person.
Well, no, I mean,
that one's more of like an armoire or a wardrobe kind of a piece.
What, the first one?
The first one, yeah.
Yeah.
But we called it the dresser.
Because that's what it was called originally.
I know. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
It's a traditional
Gotcha.
term.
So it was the traditional term. Just like we had that bride's chest.
Sure. So do we call it...
so there are...
This new one, is it like the gentleman's sideboard or something like that?
Well, I was thinking that dresser, I mean, you could use it as a dresser, but it very easily can be in a living room as a storage piece.
Oh, yeah.
For, you put your games in it or whatever.
You're talking the original one, right?
No, the one John just did.
Gotcha.
The low one.
Gotcha, okay.
Yeah.
So I kept thinking that original one would be a really nice liquor cabinet. You know what I mean? Like, if
It would be expansive. You would...
it would be an alcoholic's liquor cabinet.
Right. You can put a keg in it.
Yeah.
No, I mean,
Is that a tap handle coming out the door of that?
I mean, just because we have this Monterey cupboard that Woodsmith's working on, I've taken a couple of pictures of some liquor cabinets that I would like to do one for Papa Wood based on, and I was thinking that would be. I always thought that the gentleman's dresser, the original one, would make a really cool like liquor cabinet. That doesn't look like a liquor cabinet, but
Yeah.
Right.
That's another series of pieces that I had kicked around. You remember it was kind of a Craftsman style or pub style dartboard?
Yes.
That we did probably 10 years ago. Also done on the show. Is to like do that liquor cabinet in that
Dibsies
style.
for Pop
that would be
Wood.
cool.
Dibsies.
Okay.
Dipsies. We already have
Sorry,
precedent
Logan
there.
called it first.
We already
Yeah.
we have precedent over an existing plan, and it would fit together into
Fine,
the
whatever.
the pub suite.
Yeah.
I feel like.
And then you batch in the pub signs with it.
Right.
Oh my god!
Plus our poker table and chip case that we did a number of years ago.
That could use an update though.
It probably could,
Yeah.
but that's all right.
very 90s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Golden oak.
Just cover it in a dark stain. It'll be fine.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that's kind of cool.
Yep.
Now, Logan, you had sent this around a little while ago about, and you had, I think, mentioned it a few weeks ago on a podcast about acquiring a new plane.
Yeah, it's right here. Oh, it's so heavy, and my arms are so sore from carrying boards.
Right?
So,
Yeah,
yep. So there is the coveted auction purchase from England. Like, look at for everybody watching on YouTube. If you're not watching, you need to go pull up the video just to see these curves on this handle. Come on. Like, how awesome is
What I was kind of amazed by when you sent the picture out, because at first when you sent it, it's like, cool, generic infill plane, which apparently reside under every bridge in England. But here you can't hardly find them, and I thought it was kind of the standard closed tote at the back.
Nope, that is
but it's not.
Open tote, like, just some great lines. I will say that it is a small handle for 4 fingers. Like, they're pretty pinched.
Right.
It's more of an English plane with the pinky out, like that.
Sure.
Or
time.
the finger out on the side. It's a
both.
3. Yeah, it's a 3-finger plane or a 2-finger plane. But yeah, and it's got some weight. Like, it's heavy.
Do you know who the maker
I
is on it?
don't. The blade on it says Master Brand, warranted, Sheffield made. It says Salmon with a SALMEN, which is kind of an interesting spelling. But no, there is no maker on it. It's stamped F. Davies. So if your name is Frank Davies, I have your plane. But there is no other identifying mark on this thing. So I don't know. I just like it. I don't know what to say. It's going to find its way into the toolbox that I'm building for Popwood for this issue. It's going to have a home, and now I'm going to have to get a longer Big Brother that's going to be a jack plane.
Okay.
I mean, I can easily explain that to my wife and tell her it had to happen. So
I think the idea of the British infill is an interesting family tree in hand planes.
It is.
You know, because we're all familiar with, you know, like the Spears or Matheson or whatever as being kind of the, you know, like those were the only guys that made them. And it's like, nope, that's really not the case. Everybody.
Oh, yeah. I think... I don't know this for sure. I'm sure somebody's more knowledgeable about this than I am. But I would assume back in the, let's call it late 1800s, early 1900s, I would expect that it was very much like it was in the U.S., where there was a lot of tool manufacturers that not only made their own line of tools, like Stanley made Stanley planes, but they also made a generic line for hardware stores. So I'm guessing that is probably a similar statement in England with Infill planes. So, but
so if you're watching this on the radio and you can't see the photos, go to our YouTube channel. You can watch it or see it. Also, I'll have Logan take a few photos and we'll put it on the show notes page that you can find at woodsmith.com/podcasts.
I will say, I know I've said it before. I know there's all these brand new fancy powdered steels, PMV 11, A1, A2 steel. You give me good old vintage 01 tool steel with a high carbon cutting edge. Like, I sharpened this thing up just because first thing you open it up, you have to try it. The blade needs reground, but I did put a nice clean edge on there. There, you can see it.
Yep.
And nothing sharpens like 01. Like, yeah, it doesn't last as long as some of the harder, fancier steels, but I'll tell you what, you feel like a freaking hero when you sharpen it because it just sharpens so nicely. And maybe that's why many people hate sharpening. I've never understood why people hate sharpening, but maybe it's because they're trying to sharpen hard steel and they're not sharpening good 01 tool steel. So, yeah.
Could be.
Yep, so there she is in all her English glory. Put her off to the side so she can go have tea time and I can stop holding that 12-pound bowling ball.
All right. Guys, got anything you want to talk about? I mean, I have a whole list of stuff here.
Well, I did break a tool. Not really break a tool. I showed this when Colin was on because he said he also has a shop gavel.
Right.
I took the head of my gavel off on purpose because I don't need a shop.
And you were afraid of destroying it.
I was afraid of breaking it, yes. I was very afraid of breaking it. But I mentioned that when I bought this, it was $4, and I bought it because I thought it was ebony, but I really bought it because I loved the shape of this handle. And it's really dark, and there's a lot of backlight coming through this window, but there's some nice details, just a beautiful shape. So what's going to happen is it's going to get a new head. It's going to get a brass head on it. I have some brass at home. I'm going to chuck it in my wood lathe, and I'm going to turn a brass head for this as an adjuster for planes.
All right. Maybe the plane you just bought.
Very, very possibly the plane I just bought.
I will say that just by itself, the handle looks like it came straight from Ollivander's.
That's what I was going to say. It's like you could turn that into a nice wand.
What you hold it big end? Probably?
It's ebony.
A little dragon heart string and, phoenix feather or something.
Speaking of which, I got a chance to review a book. Can I talk about a book I reviewed real quick? I got a chance to review a book from, let me tell you who it's from. It's actually a book by a handful of authors, and it is The Art of Wand Making. It's the Compendium of Wooden Wand Making Techniques. It is by Fox Chappell. So I got a digital copy of the book, and I got to read through it, and it's super fun. Like, I know a lot of people make wands for gifts for kids. They sell them on Etsy for cosplay, for all that jazz. But it was a fun little book to read, and I got to give a little back cover blurb on it, so it was pretty cool. Yeah. Don't shake your head at me, Phil.
I'll shake my head at you.
So it was kind of cool. So I have turned a couple wands for I have two goddaughters, and they asked me to make them wands, so I made them wands a couple of years ago. Some Purple Heart wands. So it was kind of fun.
Sweet.
Yeah.
I like it. One thing that I wanted to talk about was Woodsmith has a new issue that is in people's hands right about now. Issue number 255. We always know when the new issue reaches readers based on customer service emails and calls. Because we usually have people calling in asking, hey, where can I find, or what was the finish you used on, or all that kind of stuff. So one of the things we do around here is we have a customer service department that handles a lot of the billing, subscription, promo kind of stuff, and they do a fantastic job of that. But when it comes to tech service questions, as a staff, we rotate through. We each have a 2-week term, sentence, whatever, where we answer those emails that come through on that. And our very own Dylan Baker just happened to draw a short straw this time around. So he's been getting a lot of comments based on the current issue that's out. So
I laugh because I am now off of that schedule, which means I'm the only Popwood customer service.
Right.
So I get it all the time, but yeah.
There's no kicking it down the road with you.
Oh, there's always kicking it down the road, but it's a little more personal now.
Yeah. So anyway, 255 is the number for it that just came out, and the cover project was a chess set. And you actually wrote that article.
I did.
Logan.
Yeah. It's funny. Somebody just asked me, who was that? Oh, I was just, when I was in Cedar Rapids sawing, the guys I was sawing for asked me if we had a chess plan. And I said, oh yeah. You drive right down the road. I don't know if we're in Tyson's or not. If Woodsmith sold in Tyson's around here. I don't remember. But anyways, it's like, yeah, actually, in the most recent issue, there is a chess set that I wrote. And I thought it was a really cool one.
I did too, because I feel like there's usually one of two ways that chess sets go. One is it's this super ornate, put it in a Victorian house, veneer and encrusted with moldings kind of chess set, or the kind of folded up travel sort of basic box. And we've done both of those, and they each have their place. But I thought that Chris found like a really nice middle of the road, nice looking chess set, but didn't look like something that was going to take months to complete.
Yeah. The one thing that I liked about this, and the one thing that I don't want to say the one thing that I wish we could have shown a little bit more, but you can't really show it in an article, but we have video of Mark making them, is the pieces. Because this was a very cool one where if you don't do a lot of turning or you don't have a ton of time, chess pieces can be intimidating because there's a lot of them, B, there's a lot of turning involved, or there's a lot of carving or handwork involved.
Right. Yeah.
But I think Chris and Mark did a really nice job on this one, making them very approachable. Mark, self-admittedly, is not a turner, and he turned all of them, and they turned out very nice. I really like the pawns on these because they have like little football-shaped helmets on them, or they are football-shaped helmets. Now I have a weird desire to build like a Spartan versus Persian chess set. You know what I mean? Like based on the story of the 300. But no, I thought it was a really cool one. It turned out nice.
Yeah. And I guess what I liked about it too is, we've done a bunch of chess boards, but we've never done chess pieces for that very reason.
Correct.
Because, like the board is one project and each set of pieces is essentially their own project, And like you said, it can be tough because you want all of your pawns to look consistent. You want your rooks and bishops to be consistent. So that as you look at them, it's not like they're very different size. But, like you said, Mark, not being a turner, was able to do that fairly easily, I would say. I mean, I don't want to simplify the project. It does take care and practice on it, but
Yeah,
it was doable.
for sure. So, aside from the chess set, what else did we have in that issue? It feels like such a long time ago.
I know, that was the other part that I was going to say is, that's how we know it, but because when we get to the end of an issue, we're ready for it to be done. We've been living with it for how long, and it just seems like it's ready to go. That was the one that also had the Chris's crooked knives.
Yep.
It had the sewing table.
Yeah, I like that project.
And the kids' armoire cabinet.
Oh, yeah.
The bathroom organizer.
Yep.
The sewing table I thought was interesting because when you think sewing table, I think more of a contemporary, usually has like a fold down place for a sewing machine. Mm-hmm. But again, here's one of those ones where it's a project based off of an old time name, in that it was inspired by a shaker piece where they did sewing, but it wasn't necessarily on a Singer sewing machine. It was, you had all your sewing supplies in the drawers, and on the back side is a flip up work surface for you to do hand stitching.
Yep. Well, see, I think it's interesting that when a particular style of furniture is shown that I'm interested in, immediately that project speaks to me, even though I have no desire to own one. Like, I don't need a sewing table. My wife has in our office, she has a section of our office that is her sewing and craft center, I guess. So we don't need one. But instantly, because it's a shaker design, I love it. Like,
oh yeah,
I want to build it. I have no desire for it or need it, but yeah.
Well, yeah, usually I look at stuff like that and it's like, I don't do any sewing and I don't need a sewing table, but that would make a really nice buffet or occasional table. Like, I'm looking at, how could I scale that for my purpose or change the purpose of it a little bit so it would fit into what I need. Or so they usually speak to me, but I'm like tweaking it for how I would use it.
Yeah, and that's where I feel like sometimes we're using it as a historic reference for the original name for it, but the title of it can get in the way of its functionality.
That's completely true.
Yeah. Kind of like looking at the Monterey liquor cabinet that's coming out in the next issue. It's like, if I didn't need it as a liquor cabinet, it would surely make a nice buffet or, that kind of storage. Or you could knock the top off of it and it would make a nice, same thing, buffet or, some sort of other storage unit.
Well, and I feel the same way about one of the projects in this issue of Woodsmith, which is that armoire. We call it a youth armoire.
Right.
And it was funny when we did the photos, the way that this got staged and propped was not how I was expecting. And it's not how a lot of people were expecting. We were expecting it to be more, shown in like a children's room with like trophies and maybe clothes and something that could get built for a younger kid, but grow with them so they could, take this to college and use it as a dresser in their college or an armoire in their college dorm room, right? And when it got photographed, like it was kind of like almost like a garage storage type thing, like a locker. Like a landing zone right outside the door from your house to your garage or something. Which the more I think about it, the more that type of use appeals to me. So when we call it an armoire, I do like seeing it in that setting because it's like, oh, you know what? Yeah, you're right. I don't really need this because it's big. It's a big one.
It's tall.
It's very tall.
I think it's 6 feet for sure.
Yeah. Oh, easily. Yeah. I think it's. Yeah. But anyways, the sides are 70 and a half inches. So, but yeah, if you don't need storage, it would make, or if you don't need storage in your bedroom, like an armoire would be, it would make a great landing zone right outside the garage door for golf clubs or tennis rackets or, baseball gear or whatever, like that type of stuff that usually ends up piled on the steps that you trip over as you're going out into the garage.
Right. Yeah. I guess I also like the fact that it's tall, but it's not super wide, and there's a lot of storage options in it. So it's not like two big doors that open up into a cavernous space of nothingness, or the entry world to another dimension. There are shelves. There's a hanging closet rod in one side. The 4 drawers, adds a little way to organize some stuff. So I just, again, it's one of those things where it's like we have to call it something, but there are so many possible ways for it. And I also like the way that Dylan was the designer on it, and he took a different approach to it so that it's not a traditional style, or it's not trying to be, fit in with some kind of a historic design motif. But it's built solidly. I guess I was looking at it and I was thinking, like, this is what IKEA furniture really wants to be.
Yes, and not in like a derogatory way.
Right.
As far as the design goes, like it's well done, but yeah, it looks like if you wanted, you very easily could make it fairly knockdown with connector bolts and stuff. You know what I mean?
If you wanted to, but yeah.
So yeah, I agree. It's upscale IKEA.
Right.
It's what IKEA is supposed to be.
Yeah, because it's clean lined, balances, sheet materials like plywood and using some veneer and
continuous grain on the veneer on the drawer fronts.
Right.
Pretty nice.
Yeah. And then you had an article about Matt Cremona's chair kits in there.
Yeah, and actually I was over there this morning showing a photographer around, and I still have one of those sitting in the photo studio that I need to get. So our friend Matt Cremona, even though he's a butthead for stealing that cherry log out from underneath me, it was too big for my mill anyways. No way. But anyways, he came up with this interesting concept probably almost a year ago, and I'm sure it was in the works longer than that, right at the beginning of COVID happened to be the perfect time to launch this. He started working with a manufacturer that manufactures kitchen chairs for restaurants. So like dining chairs. So you think of a restaurant, it has 80 tables. Each table has 4 chairs. That's a lot of chairs. Like there's companies that do that for a living. So he worked with them to create 4 or 5 different styles of chairs out of a number of species of each. So you can order these chair kits from Matt Cremona's website, and basically what shows up is a small box. I'm going to say small. It's like 12 inches wide, maybe 6 inches tall by 4 foot long. So it's not a huge box, but they are these chair kits that you put together. Basically, they are in the stage where they are ready for sanding, final fitting, and finish. So it takes away all the joinery work, all the cutting, and all the milling out of it. So all you're doing is kind of the fun stuff, like the finishing touches, the assembly, and the finishing isn't always a fun thing, but you can very quickly put together a set of chairs, because it's something we've talked about before. If you build a dining room table, that's one big project that you just knocked out. But if you're going to build a set of 8 dining room chairs, that's 8 medium-sized projects. Even if you're building them together and you have the efficiencies of building multiples, it's still a lot of projects. And I would venture to guess that most people opt to buy dining room chairs. Wouldn't you guys think?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because it's with chairs, there's all kind of jigs you have to make and different
templates,
specialty setups.
Usually angle joinery in there that can sometimes psych people out.
So this is nice that you can buy raw chair kits and match to a table that you've built, rather than trying to buy commercially made chairs and then kind of match the finishes or styles or whatever,
or settling with whatever you
most
get.
of the way there.
And there's two thoughts that I have on these kits after assembling them and finishing them and stuff and using one in my house for a number of months now. First, the one I have, which is Style 4, and Matt sent me he has some armchair kits, let me rephrase that. He has armchair. He has armrests available for each kit. Now, I don't think he has them on his website yet, so you can send him angry emails if you can't get the armrests yet. But I put the armrests on the one I have at my house, and I will tell you what, I could sit in that chair all day. Like, it is super comfortable. The Style 4 that I have is very tall. It's a high back chair. I think the back height is like 35 inches or 38 inches. Like, it's very tall. But it is super comfortable. No, it's taller than that. Sorry. 45, 48 inches, something like that. But anyways, it's a very formal chair, but the curvature on it is perfect. It's so comfortable to sit in. So that's my first thought on it. Second thought is some people might have I don't want to say sticker shock, but they might be taken back a little bit by the pricing on them. But I think the chair kits range, and I could be wrong, I'll pull it up quick so I give people the right number. But if you think about what you put into a chair, as far as time goes, as far as material cost goes, right? I think you have much more invested in them than you realize. And have you guys bought chairs recently from somewhere?
I haven't, because the set that we have around the and I built a dining room table. Sure. That was my wedding gift for my wife. But we had mixed match chairs for a while, and then ended up getting a set from Sam's, like 300 years ago. And I don't, they were fine and they're okay. Gotcha. They're not my fave. But
so what would you guys expect to pay for a chair? Like if you go to the store, I don't know. I've never bought chairs.
Yeah, I don't know. We purchased our table and chairs 2 or 3 kids ago, so that's probably 15 years ago. So it's like, but I'd expect it to be several $100s for the cheapest.
So Matt's kits, I'm just looking at Style 4 right now. They, depending on the species you choose, so the maple is $230 per chair. The walnut is $315. So they vary depending on species. I don't think. Right. I mean, if you're buying a set of 4 chairs, it'll be between $800 and $1,200. Maybe a little bit more if you're buying the armrest kit with them, which to me seems like a lot for chairs. But again, if you think about if I'm going to build those and I'm going to buy the material for each chair is going to run $150, $200. I'm guessing.
Pretty close.
Yeah. Now
anyway.
Plus all the bits and blades and stuff you'll need, and
steam bending some of the stuff if you're going to steam bend them. So what I'm getting at is, I think they're like, even though they have a price tag that some people might be taken aback by, I think they're a pretty dang good value, especially for how comfortable they are. Like I'm like, oh, it's my captain's chair. It sits at the head of my table. It's awesome. I love it. And there's been a few podcast listeners that have stopped over to buy lumber and stuff, and I've kind of shown them around, and I've had a couple of them sit in it, and everybody that sits in it's like, holy cow! Like an all wood chair, you wouldn't expect to be that comfy, and it really is. So
I thought it was a pretty reasonable price for what you got, and I thought the wood quality was really good. It wasn't like a bunch of mismatched grain and pieces of walnut, or that's like, here's a chair, put it all together. It was, thoughtfully done and looked uniform and nice and high quality.
And I guess that's what's really going to make it stand out from the low end stuff that you're going to buy somewhere else, where it's just like, these are the next 4 legs on the pile, so they get put into this chair. And
it's all the snouts and hooves kind of put together to make a hot dog.
Yeah. So, and that's a great point, John, is the quality of the wood. And I think I talked about it in the article. The quality of the wood was really, really nice. I got the walnut one. It was very nice. And you're right. I think because it's a solid wood seat that's sculpted, has the butt cheek curves cut into it and stuff. I think if you would go and buy like a mass-produced wooden chair like that, you're probably going to get the seat that has those like glue finger joints where the board ends meet, because they're just making a mass quantity of these. Yeah. So, I was very, very impressed with them. So yeah, just a quick look at Wayfair.com. I'm not saying that this is where this isn't the best place to base it off of, but it looks like dining chairs range from $125 to $400, $500 a piece. Mm-hmm. So I think it's right in line. Great value, and I always like supporting the small guys or the small businesses. Right. So I think Matt put a lot of time into developing these kits.
I mean, and there's nothing to say that you can't customize the kit further in terms of decorative finishes, or even if you wanted to, like all the heavy lifting has been done, but you could add carved details or accents, or it's wood, change the shape of it if you want it to blend in with a different style, or add something that makes it fit in more with your table or your dining room set, other pieces, that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
So, all right, that's it for 255 I thought was a pretty cool issue. If you don't already subscribe, it's available on the newsstand right now, since a lot of places are opening up, or you can subscribe, woodsmith.com. That wraps up another episode of the ShopNotes Podcast. If you have any questions, comments, or smart remarks, we'd love to hear them. You can leave them in the comments section on our YouTube channel, or you can email us, woodsmith@woodsmith.com. Otherwise, we'll see you again next week for another episode of the ShopNotes Podcast. Bye, everybody.
This episode of ShopNotes Podcast is brought to you by Woodsmith Plans. You'll find nearly 1,000 plans covering everything that you'd want to build. From furniture projects to gift projects, kitchen accessories, workshop projects, and jigs and more. Find your next project at woodsmithplans.com.